Hey everyone, today I wanted to do a video about a couple things that I would like to cover in some of my repair videos, but I haven't had a chance to. And a lot of that has to do with different questions I've seen and stuff like that. Some of those things are one, component sourcing, where to get some components for repairing some gear. Another thing is EPROMs. So talk a little bit about EPROMs if you're going to look to burn your own ROMs, own firmware for your devices, either to upgrade it or to replace possibly corrupted software on them. And just talk about some other generic, repair information as well. So if you are a subscriber to my channel, you'll know that I pretty much devote my time to repairing vintage audio gear. Not so much vintage, but, typically stuff from the 80s and 90s. I don't go back too far with a lot of the stuff I repair beyond that. Some 2000s gear as well. But while I'm repairing this gear, I get a lot of questions from people. Usually it's the same question over and over again. So I just want to kind of cover some of those things in here. And then also talk about a few other items that I've been meaning to talk about in my videos. I just haven't had a chance to. So I'll call this series my bench notes series. If it's interesting or I'm able to answer some stuff, I'll probably continue doing it with, there's a lot of stuff in terms of different topics to talk about for repairing gear. I mean, not just, audio gear or, professional audio gear, synthesizers, effects processors, stuff like that, but all sorts of different things. So hopefully this will be interesting to you. So one question I do see a lot is if I see people will see my videos and ask if I can repair their gear, and as much as I would really like to, I just don't have the time. I mean, I've got an entire pile here of gear that I've bought that I need to repair myself. Secondly, a lot of times it just financially doesn't make sense. So this quadriverb here is another one that I purchased dead. It says in the front, when plugged in, input lights up to max. So it's going to be a power supply issue on this as well. But regardless, I paid $1 for this. And then I think it was shipping was 12 or 13 bucks. So, no more than $15 for this for me to have it. I'm going to put, $8, $10 of components in at tops and have a working quadriverb. You can buy these new working on eBay, fully functional for, 60 bucks, sometimes as low as 50 bucks, with shipping. So they're just not, they're not expensive pieces of gear. And it the videos I put for repairing gear like this is more for end users' benefit of seeing that this stuff is easy to repair. A lot of people they'll have certain gear that they really like, they've had for years, that they want they don't want to lose, they want to repair it, but quotes to repair it are extremely expensive. So I'm kind of making these videos to show you that this stuff is easy to repair in most cases, with even just really basic electronics, troubleshooting and repair skills. Basic, equipment to repair it too. Just hand tool, soldering iron, some solder wick, and then, be able to source the correct components, usually from DigiKey or Mouser is where I get, most of my, passives and semiconductors for stuff like this. But anyway, yes, so sorry, I don't repair others' gear. I hope that the videos I put together here are beneficial to you for, certain gear that you need to get repaired. Always feel free to ask questions if there's certain, problems you possibly have with your gear. I may have seen it before, I may know what the solution is. And also if there's other gear that you'd like to see a video for, I've got a pile of it here that I'm kind of sorting through and trying to get through of stuff that I've wanted to fix and picked up secondhand, broken, typical sources, eBay, Craigslist, stuff like that. So I may have a piece of gear that you're looking for that you want to get repaired. So if you do have something, let me know, leave me a comment. I may have it there and I can put that video to the head of the queue and go through it, kind of do a teardown of it and go through common problems and be able to resolve whatever the issue is with that device there. Alright, so next question I see a lot is regarding EPROMs actually, and software, the actual ROMs inside this gear. All your old synths are going to have it, different standard old school EPROMs, UV erasable EPROMs. These are 27C64s, so they're 8-bit by 64K each. They come in various sizes. Typically you'll see them in the 27C64s, you'll see 27C 128s, 256s, and 512s. Those are your most common sizes that you'll typically have. So, they don't make these, I mean, you can still find them, but they're expensive to buy new. So the best way to get them is to purchase them used, via eBay or other things like that. The problem is that even used, a lot of times people want to charge a lot of money for them, which is extremely annoying. And the thing that I really hate is the fact that you'll have eBay sellers selling basically, a set of burnt ROMs, and they'll want $30, $40, $50 for them, which is silly because, this is, $4, $8 worth of chips total, and you can burn them yourself, using a programmer, and get all the software, the original ROMs online. There's a guy, his name's escaping me right now. He runs a website, DBWBP. I'll put the link up on the video here. But he has the best collection of vintage ROMs, specifically just the bin files or the hex files for programming EPROMs for pretty much nearly everything out there. It's actually, his collection's really outstanding. I've actually contributed some of my ROMs to him, or my bin files that he didn't have for gear there. But it's really been kind of the standard place to find nearly anything. You know, even going back to some of the really old gear, really hard to find versions of different things. But that aside, if you want to buy, you know, EPROMs and burn them yourself, I'll talk about the programmers here in a second. But when you're searching eBay for ROMs, you know, don't just search for EPROM. A lot of times, sometimes you find good deals, sometimes you don't. A lot of people still want to rip you off. So, like this lot of ROMs here of EPROMs, I actually purchased. These are old slot machine ROMs. Various games from different companies. There's a lot of Bally games in here. A couple other brands I'm not familiar with, but you can see the names. You know, Blackjack, S Plus. I don't really know what that is, but just a whole ton of them. So, you know, you just have to kind of be clever with your searches and do, you know, creative searches as you're looking for different things. The image searches obviously help, not image searches, but just looking at the images for the different lots under certain categories. And I mean, I think I paid like $30 or $40 for all of these, which was a really good deal. So some of them look really clean, other ones have stickers, but it's fine. You pull the stickers off, you put them in the UV eraser, wipe them clean, you know, test them, verify they're blank, and then, you know, you're good to program them for whatever gear you want to. And like I said, with the ROMs being easily available right now from the website I mentioned, you know, you can pretty much replace these for anything or upgrade firmware for anything out there you need. You know, like for Lexicon gear, most gear has different, you know, revisions of the actual ROMs that come out. So this set of 4 here is actually the version 2.0 firmware for Lexicon PCM60. I've got 2 of them, so I've got one with the 1.0 and the second one I have with the 2.0. It's just that way I can compare side by side the actual differences between the algorithms on the 2 different sets. So it's an easy way to do it. You can also get single-time programmable ROMs as well. Those are still available from places like DigiKey and Mouser. They're not that expensive, a couple dollars a piece. If you want to go that route, you can still program them, you know, with your EEPROM programmer. The only downside is they're single-time programmable. So, you know, whatever you burn to them, that's it. It's set with that. And, you know, it's fine if you have the right ROMs, you know, they're good, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, with this case, if I screw them up or just for testing, if I want to wipe these, I can, which is nice. So, as for programmers, there's a lot out there. I used to use this guy. It still works, it's fine, but the machine that needs is, it actually has an 8-bit ISA card to actually get it, and the software is kind of clunky. I have to have an old, like, Windows 98 machine around in the bench here to be able to run the software on it. Because I need a motherboard with an ISA slot to run the card for this, which was annoying. And 98 was minimal enough. I mean, I didn't use the machine for anything else. I wasn't even hooked up to the network. It was just, you know, I would get my ROMs over to it via floppy or USB. I can't remember it. I programmed that way, but that was a couple years ago. So I don't recommend going that route. There's much better solutions. This little guy I really like. This Mini Pro programmer, straight out of Shenzhen. I mean, I think they're really cheap on eBay. I can't remember how much they are. Under $50. I want to say it's like 30 or 40 or something like that. I'm drawing a blank on what I actually paid for it, but it's really good and it works really well. Windows-based software, which is fine. They actually continually update the revisions of the software too. There was a recent release that added a bunch more devices to it, which is cool. So the device support's really robust. It supports pretty much anything out there, with exception of like your really large EPROMs. I don't have them, but like the ones that are a couple megabits in size, you know, 2 or 4 megabit, where they're just massively large dips, but it's fine. You don't usually see those in much gear. Like I said, everything from the 64 to the 512 is typically what you see in most of this vintage gear. Because these were expensive back then, so they would do, you know, the minimal amount possible, the smallest ones that possible, with whatever firmware they need to fit on there. A second EEPROM programmer I really like, you can get on eBay among other places, is one called the Key William, I think it is, EEPROM programmer. I've used it before. I don't have one, but I know people that do, and it works also very well. It doesn't have a case, it's just a raw board, you know, with the socket on there to do it, but it's like $30 plus a little bit more for shipping, so it's price comparable to this, but it's also a really good board, made in USA too, I believe, so, or programmer I should say. So that's EEPROM programmers. So The only other thing you need for these, these UV erasable EPROMs is a eraser, and I've got my little data erase too here. I've actually got some in there still, probably wiped. Yeah, 32s. So this is just a, it's got a little transformer plugs into it. It's got a UV tube inside, basically, like a fluorescent tube that emits UV light. And you dump your EPROMs in there and turn it on. It's got a built-in timer. It runs for, can't remember how long, hour or two, something like that, and then your EPROMs are erased. So there's a ton of these on eBay, different brands, different sizes. Most of them are pretty old, because this is older technology, obviously, but there's a couple manufacturers that make new ones as well, and there's even self-projects where you can do it yourself to build one using UV light sources of various types. But you will need an eraser if you go the route of getting the used EPROMs to make sure that they're actually wiped. I'm going to do a different video too later date about upgrading ROMs in devices, because it almost warrants a whole video just on its own. Alright, next thing I wanted to talk about was capacitance testers, or LCR meters for that matter. So I've always had these Agilents, which I like. So there's the 1701B, which is just a capacitance meter itself. And then I've got the 1731B, which is actually an LCR meter, which is nice. But even with both of these, they don't measure ESR, which is really annoying. So there's these little LCR meters on eBay that you can get all day long for basically nothing. I mean, they're like, I forget how much. They're cheap, maybe $15 shipped from China. And they're amazingly accurate, like really, really accurate. I've been comparing it to my Agilent meter, and it's basically spot on. So the other cool thing about them is they support your actual ESR. So for capacitors, they'll tell you your equivalent series resistance of the cap. And even these expensive Agilents don't do that, which is kind of funny. So it's nice. And there's been a lot of discussion of these on different forums and stuff like that. And they are really, really good. People, swear by them for the accuracy is, at least for testing components and stuff like that, it's well worth having one. I mean, measuring capacitors is not something I typically do that much. Anyway, I usually use them more for inductors. Inductors are usually a lot harder to figure out what the values are, especially if it's older inductors and you have different color codes or weird designations on there to try to figure out what the value is, especially for different RF circuits and stuff like that. So I do recommend these devices, though. There's a bunch of different revisions of them, some cases, some don't, but like I said, they're solid for how cheap they are. So I've actually been really, really happy with this thing. I mean, it's basically spot on, 100.1 microfarad. This is a brand new Panasonic 100 microfarad cap. So yeah, it's a good little tool. Next, cleaning synths. That's something that I've seen a couple questions for, is people ask me what I use to clean my synths. Because whenever I repair them, or any gear for that matter, I usually go through and I clean the whole thing down. I remove all the buttons, clean all them, and then wipe the whole unit down. Especially if it's an older synth that's been used a lot in different studios and taken on the road, like it just accumulates just nasty crud on it, and it's just, you want to clean it, but you got to be careful because you don't want to rub any of the silk screening or printing off on it. You want to make sure you don't scratch it. So there's this plastic cleaner that I've had for years. I bought a couple of these, I don't even remember how long ago, probably almost 15 years or more. This company was called Generation 2000. The product was called Plastiglass. This stuff is outstanding. The sad part is this company no longer exists. And the brand actually might be right off. I think it's right off, and it was the Generation 2000 line. But regardless, this company doesn't exist anymore. I've done tons of research, dug everywhere to find it. I can't find any more of this, which is sad, because this is my last can and it's almost gone. So I'm kind of like just saving this for the gear that I really, really need to clean carefully. But it does a really, really good job of cleaning all sorts of different plastics. Clear acrylics, different types of ABS, whatever it might be, whatever the synth might be, or gear for that matter. It doesn't scratch it. Always when you're cleaning, always use a microfiber cloth, of some sort. I've used paper towel before on some things, but be careful with it because it will scratch a lot of your clear lenses and windows on your synths. So always use microfiber if you can. And this will clean pretty much all plastics, which is nice. But since you can't get this anymore, the next best thing I found is this Tech Spray plastic glass cleaner. So it works also really well. I don't like it as much as this. This stuff is very low odor. This has kind of an odor to it, and there's all sorts of precautions on here in terms of you know, using this, use fresh air, blah blah blah. It does kind of stink, which is sad. This stuff was such a good product. I wish I could find it, but I can't. But this is a good replacement. So it does the same. It does a good job of cleaning. It doesn't scratch anything, which is nice. So this is what I've been using on some of my synths now to clean them, and definitely recommend it. Now for the clear windows on synths, through your displays and stuff like that, I use these McGuire's products. These plastic polish and plastic cleaner, number 10 and number 17. A lot of times your clear windows on the synth itself will be scratched from people, you know, wiping the synth down and cleaning it, usually using something abrasive like paper towel or, you know, Windex or something that's chemical that, you know, will fog it up, and it's just should not be used on that gear. But these work really well for cleaning it up. So I believe you use the cleaner first, and that basically is like a scratch remover, along with, you know, the microfiber cloth, and then you go through it with the polish afterwards. Much more finer polish for the actual finish on there, and it really does make those plastic lenses crystal clear. It makes them look really nice. So these products I definitely recommend for cleaning the clear windows on synths. For your controls, your rotary controls and sliders and stuff like that, there's the KEG products, the Deoxit, and then the Kailube MCL, as they call it. So the Deoxit is good just as a general switch cleaner for mechanical switches and the like. Spray some in there, you don't need much, and then just cycle the switch a ton of times. And if you have a crusty switch that's kind of intermittent or shaky, a lot of times this will clean it up, which works pretty well. The MCL is the moving contact lubricant. This is designed for your faders and potentiometers. It's actually got a lubricant in there that lubricates the contact and gives it a good feel afterwards. So it's hit or miss on your potentiometer. It just depends how worn it is. I mean, if it's at a point where the carbon contact, you know, on the slider or the pod has just been worn away, you know, physically worn away, this isn't going to solve your problem. But in a lot of cases it will, especially if it's just dirt and dust and things like that that's gotten, you know, came inside your pod or the slider, and it just needs a cleaner to make it function again. So both of these work very well. They're not cheap. I think they're like $15, $20 each, unfortunately. But I mean, this one I've had for, again, probably 15 years. This one maybe 10. They'll last a really long time because, again, you don't need very much. All right, next up is LCDs. So this gear, especially the studio gear that's been on a lot, your effects processors, rack effects, things like this, your LCDs will fade and become dimmer over time. So the displays themselves will be of this type. These are Hitachi HD 44780 compatible displays, and they come in various sizes. Typically all your gear is going to have one of three sizes. Either be a 2 row by 16 character, it'll be a 2 row by 20 character, or it'll be a 2 row by, I believe, 40 character for your bigger displays that you see on gear. And those three displays are pretty much used on all of your old vintage gear, you know, synth stuff like that, that has a display window of roughly that size. So I've got, you know, a ton of them. There's a 2x40. That's a 2x16, I believe. Probably got some 2x20s in here somewhere. I'm not sure. But there's also your 4x20s, which are that size there. You don't see those too much that often anymore. But all of these you can get, I mean, on eBay for next to nothing. I mean, they are extremely cheap. You can get them shipped here from China for roughly $5. They're not expensive. The only thing you need to watch for when you're doing it is the pin configuration on them. So some will have the pin configuration across the top, like you see on here. Others will have the pin configuration along the side. You need to look at your piece of gear and make sure that, you know, the pin configuration on yours matches up to what's actually in there right now when you're purchasing these. Either one will work. You can just rewire it for, you know, the pins on there. They're just the address data lines, power lines, a contrast line. But it's just extra work and unnecessary work. You can get them in either size. Just get the right size for what you need. You notice the size of the PCB on these is pretty standardized too. So they're pretty much a uniform size, and they'll, you know, any display you get for the right, you know, ratio of characters will work in the unit that you're actually working on. Now there'll be certain sellers on eBay that you see a lot that will try to sell a display for a certain piece of gear, which is really frustrating because they'll say, you know, this is exactly for this rack unit, you know, the display, replacement display, and they'll want like $70 for it, which is just stupid because all those displays are the same. You know, they're one of these many types in most cases. In some cases, you will find the graphical displays where, you know, be a matrix of pixels. Even in those, you can find them. I mean, somebody still makes them. These manufacturers typically aren't making custom displays for this gear. They're just using off-the-shelf stuff. And that stuff that they made is typically still made today by many manufacturers because they're still using it today. You know, these are still common displays you see on all sorts of industrial gear, and even some modern, you know, synths and different things and rack units and stuff like that. So point being to make is when you need to replace a display, just because you find a listing for it that says, you know, this is for whatever rolling piece of gear, you know, graphic display, you know, $100 and something, do some research on it. You can typically find that exact same display from, you know, an actual OEM seller, you know, via eBay or other sources for significantly less. The displays themselves, even the graphic ones, aren't that expensive to buy. Now, you'll also see OLED displays, which are really, really nice looking, and you'll see sellers wanting the premium for those because they're OLED. I like them. I think they look really, really nice. But you can also find those. Again, you just need to do some research and find the original display for the piece of gear that you're looking at, instead of, you know, paying the price that they're trying to charge you for that OLED display just because they're telling you that, you know, it's designed only for that piece of gear. They bought it from somewhere and they're charging up a bunch for it and reselling it. So you just got to figure out where they got it from. You know, and doing some Google searches, some image searches, stuff like that for the display, and you can typically find it. Alright, so next question I have is, or at least I see a lot, is people ask me, when I'm desoldering stuff, especially when I'm doing ICs and stuff like that and boards, how come I don't use a vacuum desoldering station? Why do you always use solder wick? So, I use solder wick because I love solder wick. I think it's an excellent method of removing components. The real reason I don't use the vacuum desoldering station, I have an old Weller station, it works reasonably well, is because a lot of these older units, the pins on the actual boards are folded. And what I mean by that is, there's just like a random board here I have, is when the ICs are inserted, they fold the pins, you know, on the actual board over on there. And because of that, it's difficult to get a vacuum desoldering iron in there over that pin to be able to suck the solder, you know, the solder out of all those pins there. You can do it, but you also risk, especially on the finer traces, damaging the actual traces in the board and lifting pads, things like that. So on this type of situation, it's much safer to use solder wick to actually, you know, remove the solder from the pins. Now here's another board. This is just an old Apple 80 column line card. You can see that it does have straight pins on the actual board. That makes it significantly easier to use a solder sucker because you can just go straight through and remove everything very easily, and then the part will basically just drop right out. Not that you need to on a socketed board, but just as a, you know, example of what the straight pins versus folded pins are. So the solder wick's also cheap. I mean, you can get all different sizes of it. Typically I just use a little bit thicker stuff, number 4 or the .100 as I call it. Then I've got the thinner stuff as well, which is the .050. This is good for more finer pitch stuff, but typically I'm using this for almost everything. A lot of the boards you work on too, they're just double layer. You're not dealing with, you know, quad layer or more. So they're a thinner board on this gear. It makes it pretty easy to remove the solder. You just need a hot iron, blunt tip in that iron, big roll of solder wick, and you can usually get the components removed pretty quick. With the solder suckers too, you know, even then a lot of times you got to go through and wick some of the solder out just because, you know, there'll be a stuck pin on one of the ends or something like that not coming out. So while they do save a lot of time, I really like it, especially when you're dealing with bigger, you know, straight through pin boards and stuff like that, moving big ICs or a lot of ICs. For the repair work I do, typically just standard solder wick is good. Regular manual pump vacuum or just pump soldering station or solder suckers as you call them, not a big fan of those. I had one years ago. I don't even know where it's at anymore. Solder wick just works so much better for me. I mean, certain people love them. That, you know, that's fine. I'm just not a big fan. Alright, so that kind of concludes all the little things I wanted to talk about. I've got a lot of repairs coming up though, which are pretty exciting. So I've got a Yamaha DX11 that needs some help, basically. I've got 2 Roland Alpha Junos. I got an Alpha Juno 1, Alpha Juno 2. I'm going to be going through both of those. I've got some Kurzweil rack units. So I've got a K2000 and a K2500 RS. Those are just monsters. Just amazing pieces of gear that you can get really, really cheap now, which is really, really cool. Excited to go through those. Got some Roland STE 1000s digital delays. I've got an old Effectron digital delay, so that's a really cool piece of gear. I'm excited to take a look at that. Another Lexicon PCM 60. Probably not going to do a video. I've already done a video on that. This one does have a different problem too. It's got a digital issue with it where the sound's actually distorted going through it, so that will probably be an interesting repair, but I probably won't do another Lexicon anyway. And Sony effects unit, an R7, so something that's kind of obscure, you don't see very often. I got a couple Yamaha Rev 5. I've got a couple Yamaha Revs too, Rev 5 and Rev 7. Two really nice, again, studio grade, vintage effects processors. Very similar to the SPX 90, but a lot higher quality. They were kind of the studio or professional version of the SPXs at the time. Rev 5 particular, I mean, that thing's just a monster in terms of DSP. So I hope this is interesting, or at least valuable to you somewhat in terms of repairing gear and sourcing parts and things like that. So if this video is popular, I'll continue this series. I've got a lot more to talk about in terms of just general electronics repair, studio gear, all sorts of interesting kind of topics that don't typically fit into one of my normal repair videos. So hopefully this was useful, and thanks for watching.